Thank you so much, Tanya. Really appreciate that. And welcome everyone to Using Research to Create Hunger-Free Communities. We're thrilled that you're able to join us this afternoon for our second plenary, and we hope that you're enjoying the conference so far. For this session, I'm being joined by my colleague Amanda. So we'll do introductions now. In case you haven't met me yet, I'm Minerva Delgado. I'm the Director of Coalitions and Advocacy at the Alliance to End Hunger. And as part of my portfolio, I oversee our work in what we call the Hunger Free Communities Initiative.
Hi, everyone. I'm delighted to be with you today and hope you're enjoying the conference. My name is Amanda Bankston. I'm a researcher and doctoral student at Syracuse University, where I study community-based collaboration and conflict management.
Thanks, Amanda. And so just to give a quick overview of our presentation, we're going to introduce you, if you're not familiar with the Hunger Free Communities Network and Initiative and our impact framework. We'll start with those sort of framing definitions and explanations of what we do in the Hunger Free Communities Network. And then we'll turn it over to Amanda to talk about some exciting research that she's doing really about the effects of that hunger-free community partners are having in their communities and how they're utilizing the collective impact and framework, as well as the Hunger-Free Communities Impact Framework. So that's some really exciting stuff that's happening now that you can get engaged in, and we'll talk to you about how you can get engaged in that work. So Tanya, if you don't mind launching the first poll, how much, I'm sorry, that's not the first poll. The first poll is, are you currently a member of the Alliance to End Hunger's Hunger Free Communities Network? Are you one of our network partners? So please answer the poll so we have a sense. Most of you are familiar with the Alliance and the work that we're doing. We'll spend a little more time on some of the newer research that's happening. So we'll try to gauge our conversation, to the audience, depending on your level of knowledge overall of the Hunger Free Communities Network. And all right, if you will just give folks a second to fill out that poll. And Tanya, let us know when we have some results.
Sounds good. I'm going to give it another second here, and then I will end the poll. Hopefully everyone's gotten a chance to answer. All right. And Minerva and Amanda, if you click polls and scroll to the bottom, you'll be able to see the results that attendees are seeing right now.
Okay, so it looks like we have a lot of newcomers, which is wonderful. So thank you for joining us. And hopefully by the end of the session, you'll have a really good sense of who we are and what we're doing. And really look forward to sharing some of the information with you during the session. And I'm going to go ahead and advance our slide. And we have, here we go. So I think actually we can probably skip this poll question, just having a sense that we have a good number of new folks. So just to kind of give you an overview of what the Hunger Free initiative is at the Alliance to End Hunger, I think first it's important to just understand Alliance to End Hunger, we're a national nonprofit organization. And we are a multi-sector alliance. So we are a true alliance. And to be a member organization of the Alliance to End Hunger, you have to be a national nonprofit, international NGO, faith network of any kind, corporation, university, or foundation. And so we are this multi-sector collaborative. And part of what we wanted to do with the Hunger Free Communities Network, which is our signature program in the US, is to encourage the development and support the work of anti-hunger organizations that then join the Hunger Free Communities Network to be part of what's happening here at the Alliance. So when we talk about our Hunger Free Community partners, we're talking about partners in the Alliance's Hunger Free Communities Network. And currently we have about 51 partners in 31 states. And so our role is really one of supporting these multi-sector coalitions or aspiring coalitions to end hunger in their communities through a collective impact approach. And so our goals with the network is, really to create this shared learning environment where we can have a deeper understanding of hunger in our communities and share that understanding with our political leaders, where we build capacity. So part of our mission is to help you all be better at what you're doing, or to spread the amazing work that you're doing in other communities that could really benefit from that knowledge, as well as to increase your impact, in terms of being able to bring you kind of the knowledge and the tools that are available to help improve your work. And a lot of the work is around access, improving access, and removing barriers to federal nutrition programs. But there's a lot of other work going on in communities as well. We know that the work that's happening is incredibly diverse. So what we are putting together here is really what we think of as a community of practice with the Hunger Free Communities Network. And I'm happy to share later how you all can join us if you're not already a member of the Hunger Free Communities Network. But we really think of it as a community. Right now, like I said, we're partnering with 51 organizations in 31 states. And so we are sort of, really helping to bridge those communities. Part of being in this network is about sharing information about what's happening in different parts of the country. And so at the Alliance, and I'm going to go counterclockwise here, at the Alliance, we also provide support. And so part of that support is around consultation, technical assistance. We do lots of trainings related to how can you improve, addressing barriers to federal nutrition programs, or making connections, among partners in your community to create a hunger-free community plan, or any other, many other sort of information that we can provide at the Alliance. We do a lot of work around racial equity and helping anti-hunger organizations understand that, they can be part of addressing sort of racial disparities and food insecurity in their communities, and talking about how we can better do that. So that's an example of some of the work we do with our partners. Resources, we're building a knowledge base, which certainly, and making available tools and resources through the Alliance to End Hunger to this network. But we also are investing, as you may have heard earlier from Eric Mitchell, we'll be investing resources into a small grant program for our Hunger Free community partners to help you achieve some of those goals that you have in your community. Finally, convenings is really the other area in which we work. And this is our signature annual convening of the Hunger Free Communities Network, but we also have quarterly meetings and provide other opportunities for groups in the network to get to know each other. We'll be scheduling some in-person regional meetings starting in early 2024. So we're really excited about that. And all of this is really to create a community of practice around what works in communities to end hunger and improve food security, improve nutrition security, which is what we talk about when we're really talking about an end to hunger, is making sure that all of your community members have the resources to access the food that they need. And so as part of sort of conceptualizing this community of practice and how we can all work together, one of the first questions that came up was, what is a hunger-free community? Like, what does that look like? What does that mean? And what is there any guidance for organizations or coalitions as they embark upon, their journey to try to create hunger-free communities? And so we at the Alliance created this Hunger-Free Community Impact Framework. And this really came out of a lot of work that I was doing in my community in New York City, as well as just being able to observe some of the very powerful and effective partners in our network. And so what this describes is sort of an increasing level of impact along a scale from awakening to performing. And so we've been using this sort of as the basis of what our impact. So this impact framework, we've been using it as a basis of providing technical assistance. So how can we help you move from stage, one stage to another? What are some of the competencies that are needed in these various stages? And so we found this very helpful. And I know from many of your feedback, you found this to be a very helpful framework. I'm going to describe it now. And part of what we're going to discuss today is actually the research that Amanda is now doing on this impact framework. I'm sorry, I'm going in the wrong direction. Here we go. The impact framework to really discover how folks are using this impact framework in the network, and how can we, improve this. And so, but for now, this is the framework. And we start with the awakening stage. So this is where there's a sense that there is hunger, food insecurity in a community. And there's typically a response that then follows. And that response is typically in the beginning sort of uncoordinated. So we usually end up seeing different hunger relief organizations or efforts or initiatives get started, and they're typically working in silos and not necessarily coordinating with one another in the community. So that's typically the stage we kind of meet a lot of our partners in this sort of, they're responding to the hunger issue in their community, but there isn't necessarily an effort, a consolidated or concerted effort to work in a collaborative way. So as we see groups maturing, we then start to see some coalescing, usually key community stakeholders. And this can be following a call to action by a strategic leader. And we've seen in so many examples how diverse the groups are that are sort of, in the network. So sometimes that strategic leader is an elected official, but many times it can be a member of the faith community. It can be, your local food bank or your local No Kid Hungry campaign. There's so many different ways. Many times a funder is the key strategic call to action who says, hey, we want to bring folks in our community together as a funder. We want to make sure that all of our grantees are working together to identify how they can work closely together to end hunger, right? And so then we typically start to see some convening at this point, and the identification of who are going to be the leaders in this Hunger-Free Communities initiative. In the formalizing stage, groups begin to cooperate and coordinate. So this is typically where we start to see some coalescing around. Maybe it's a coalition, maybe it's you call it the Hunger-Free X Coalition or the Anti-Hunger Coalition. There are many different iterations of this. It can be led typically by one organization, but many times you have groups of organizations coming together and sharing power in terms of how to work together around ending hunger. So we start to see groups beginning to cooperate and coordinate their work. Individual organizations start to identify as part of the coalition or the network. And then there's, so this begins sort of a formalization effort around the work of coming together to end hunger in a community. In the maturing stage, we start to see a sustainable network where groups have been working together. They are creating political and social capital. They may be doing advocacy together. They may be doing lots of other work in their community together. But we're starting to see high levels of cross-system and cross-sector coordination and communication. So coordination of anti-hunger relief efforts is starting to happen across sectors, and that typically also comes with remediation of like gaps or barriers to programming efforts, as well as we see the duplication of efforts and many times is starting to be addressed as well as groups start to coordinate across the food system. And then finally, in the performing stage, which we do recognize is very much an aspirational stage, we see the community achieve high levels of food security. We hope to see full engagement in community nutrition programs, including federal nutrition programs like SNAP and WIC, as well as an emergency, system that is robust to address immediate needs. We know that no matter how many folks are able to access food and nutrition programs and able to become food insecure, there's always going to be a need for an emergency response. There may be a fire, there may be a natural disaster, there may be any number of things that will require that, we have a disaster response or emergency food system to be able to address immediate needs. And so having a robust safety net, as well as high participation in nutrition programs, we can see how a community becomes, highly food secure. And so that is the impact framework. And next, we'll turn to Amanda, who's going to share information about her research project, which is related to the impact framework and the work we're doing with the Hunger Free Communities Network. Thanks, Amanda.
Great. Thank you, Minerva. Thank you, Minerva. So jumping right in, Minerva shared how the HFC impact framework can really help both design and evaluate collaboration at the community level. And surprisingly, there's a huge lack of evidence-based resources in this space. So what we're doing to address this significant gap is we're looking at a multi-pronged research approach that's organic, iterative, and it's our research project. So it's really based on the leaders working every day in community like yourself. It's a 5-pronged approach, starting with a literature review, which we'll talk about today. Coming down the pipeline, we have focus groups, a network survey, and case studies to look out for that we're hoping to engage you all around. And finally, a key part of this is knowledge sharing, continuously being in dialogue with you all over the course of the project. And we can get the next slide. And with that, we have several goals. Like I said, our first goal is for this to be a participatory and inclusive process beginning today. So later today, you'll have an opportunity to share some information with us. Second, we have a few key deliverables that we know we want to contribute, although there is room for more as you all see fit. The first is a revision of the HFC impact framework that we just looked at together. Second, we're looking at case studies for about 10 groups across the network to learn about best practices, how they're impacting the community, their own home community, and then how the HFC network and being part of this community of practice is impacting their work. Then we're going to use the survey that we'll be launching very soon to issue a State of the HFC Network report where you can learn about common trends, issues, challenges, and areas of need and support facing these 51 groups, and hopefully more coming into the fold. And finally, like I said, this is a significant gap, although in every community across the globe and across every policy domain, we know collaboration is happening and coalition building is happening. These evidence-based resources are few and far between. So we're hoping to contribute peer-reviewed research as well. And all of that is examining how you all are leveraging the HFC network to build knowledge, advance your missions, and of course, impact your communities. We can look at that next slide. And I say these are preliminary research questions around the impact you're making in community, around who's participating and what resources you need, around how the theory of change is holding up in practice, and around trends across the field. Those are research questions we've gotten from the literature and from talking to you all so far, but it says preliminary because some of these research questions will bubble up from speaking to all of you. So I'm going to ask you throughout this presentation to think about your pressing questions. What are you facing today in the field? What answers would you love to have an evidence base around? You'll have an opportunity at the end of this presentation to share some of those ideas. We can look at the next slide. So collaboration is complex, right? If you're involved in any way in community-based collaboration or coalition building, you know it's hard to talk about what it is and how we do our work. One of the things we've learned early in our literature review is that we're parsing all of this to have a multi-level approach, looking at the operational level, what's happening in your inbox, what's happening in your daily life, in your meeting rooms, that organizational level, who gets a seat at the table, what are your institutional arrangements, and then finally that system context, what's happening socially, politically, economically, to shape what's happening in your coalition. We're weaving together theories from undergirding all of these bodies of research in kind of a novel way. And we can look at the next slide. And all of this is rooted, as Minerva said, in collective impact theory. This is a contribution straddling theory and practice that basically gives us a 5-ingredient recipe to successful community-based collaboration, consisting of a common agenda, shared measurement, mutually reinforcing activities, continuous communication, and backbone support, what Minerva was talking about as a strategic leader or someone taking the driver's seat of a collaborative endeavor. This is key to understanding. You'll see it across, again, many policy domains. It's a popular approach, and it is the foundation for the impact framework that you're now familiar with. And we can move to the next slide. Now, what we're basically doing is holding the impact framework against some of the popular literatures around collaboration, around coalition building. And here's one example. To the left, you see the framework that you're very familiar with that vertical line. On the right, you're seeing the most popular and highly cited integrated framework for collaborative governance across literatures looking at work from environmental justice to housing. And you can see the straight line on the left doesn't mirror the kind of dynamic system context that's been prescribed from the literature. However, if we advance slides quickly, we can see how responding and awakening kind of aligned to the drivers. Yes, formalizing and coalescing kind of aligned to looking at the system context. This mirrors a logic model, so inputs, actions, outputs, and outcomes. And how when you get to the maturing and performing phase, maybe you're looking at the right side of this popular model, actions and outcomes, right? But we know, again, this is dynamic, and you're not necessarily advancing in a linear way, but that you can have a foot all across this model, right? And maybe you're working at many levels at the very same time. But we want to draw attention to what we can control as leaders, and that is collaboration dynamics. In other words, how we work together, how we engage, develop shared motivation, and build our joint capacity for action together. And with that, and we can advance our slide. What we've done as an initial step is a literature review consisting of 119 case studies of collective impact theory-based initiatives across policy domains ranging from 1-year-old to 50+ years old. We looked at 34 peer-reviewed studies using 9 theoretical frameworks and across 5 policy domains ranging from housing, again, to environmental justice and watersheds. So a really broad sample there. And we can look at what we found. And so don't get too overwhelmed here. The bottom, that should look familiar. So that's our HFC impact framework, the steps. And so what we found is this really useful study, or pair of studies by Imperial and colleagues, and what you're looking at is from Ulibarri and colleagues. And here they've done what they've called life cycle research, very similar to what we're looking at in the HFC impact model. You can see how awakening and responding kind of line up to activation and collectivity. You can see how coalescing and formalizing might line up to institutionalization, what they've called. And you can see how maturing and performing look at what they might call stability, decline, and change. Now, it looks like a roller coaster to me. And maybe as a leader, at some point you've said, coalition building or collaboration can feel like a roller coaster. Well, here's our evidence. This is a sample of 39 studies, but it's really consistent with what we found in our 119 case studies to show you that, in fact, it isn't a linear process, but that groups, if you go from left to right, they might fail to activate. They might complete work before they ever reach maturity. You see all the loop-de-loos? That's reinitiation. That's re-engagement that happens. And finally, groups decline, whether rapidly or maybe more slowly. And very few groups reach that kind of performing that aspirational level of stability over time, okay? And pulling from those 119 studies, we've identified 5 key variables that have been really helpful to help us think about how we might rigorously evaluate the impact framework. Those are on your right. That's activation, process dynamics, leadership, accountability, and evaluation. And we'll talk a little bit about each of these in just a bit. So the next slide, we'll talk about activation. So that's this awakening, right? This realization that coordinated efforts need to happen. And what we've learned here is really interesting. We can think about that in 2 ways. So Minerva mentioned that maybe your initiative is kind of initiated by a funder or a strategic leader in community who kind of externally might direct a collaborative. On the other hand, you might have bubbled up organically from grassroots collaboration. That distinction really matters with these 39 groups and our 119 broader sample. Those self-initiated grassroots groups have a really hard time with that steep incline at the beginning of the roller coaster on your left. That awakening and responding period can be particularly rocky for those groups. So again, putting this into practice, we now learn that if that's who you are, technical assistance there and resources there become particularly important. On the other hand, if you're externally directed, you'll have a little bit of an easier time getting up that first climb of the roller coaster, but that's where things become a little tricky for you. We see rapid decline in those groups over time, and those loop-de-loos that you're seeing a lot of the time impact those externally directed groups. What we also learned, interestingly, is that over time, those grassroots-oriented groups perform better. So what can we learn from them? What can we learn from these 119 case studies? We're looking at that and putting what you all know to the test to kind of come up with some resources around that. So next, let's take a look at the next piece of the puzzle, which is how you work together, those collaborative dynamics or those process dynamics. Here, what we found is much what you probably already know from collective impact theory, that consistency is key. So that shared measurement, that consistent communication, consistent meeting. Also that, the democratic process, the dialogue, the joint action, the knowledge sharing becomes super important. And again, we know that engagement declines over time in those externally directed groups. So this is where we might have resources in place and provide technical assistance to support those groups as they start to weather those challenges. We can move to the next variable here, which is leadership. So if I were to ask you all to describe who the leader of your HFC is, some of you might quickly come up with 1 or 2 names. Others might really have a challenge to identify a single leader. So what we found is, interestingly, those in the awakening and responding in earlier phases are really focusing their efforts there. See a singular leader or a small, well-defined leadership structure working best. But if you reach maturity or performing, oftentimes you might scratch your head and struggle to name a single leader, because one of the markers of maturation is shared leadership. right? So if you're having trouble seeing where you fall on the ladder, on the impact framework, that might be an indicator, if you're kind of having trouble naming a leader, that you've reached a level of maturation. So that's one interesting thing we found, and we're interested to see how that holds up across the network. And we can look at the next variable. So finally, evaluation. For the sake of time, I'll go ahead and some of this, problem definition is really hard no matter where you are on the impact framework. But here's something really interesting. Across all 119 groups, one of the most important variables that drives you and gets you from one phase to another, maybe not in a linear way, but over time, is having intermediate level outcomes. So not just focusing on those big, hairy goals of ending hunger, and not just focusing on those smaller outputs and the metrics you can kind of follow, but coming up with those mid-range goals and consistently revising them. That's a marker of a successful group. And that's something we're interested in looking at as we speak to all of you. And finally, our last accountability. So this is exciting for us. You talked a lot about equity, about racial justice, about really important frameworks, engaging folks with lived experience. That is something we're seeing increasingly across everyone thinking about collaboration in this way. But there is no evidence base as to how that impacts the shape and duration and sustainability of your collaborative. So the HFC network can contribute some great knowledge to the broader well of knowledge around how those variables, how engagement might contribute to that, and how that's looking in your communities. So we're really excited to talk to you all and folks in your communities about how that's looking. And so if we pan out, again, that's just one small piece of the literature review, which again, that's the operational level, but we're also looking at organizational and environmental levels within that literature review. But for today, that gives you a flavor of how we're using research to kind of inform our work. And as a reminder, the next steps include speaking to all of you. So the next thing you'll see is we're polishing up a survey that will launch soon. And here you'll have the opportunity, no matter who you are. So you might have answered, I'm not sure if I'm in the network, I'm not in the network yet. Well, you still have valuable knowledge to contribute to us so that we can learn from one another and build more resilient communities. You also see opportunities to engage in those case studies. We don't just want to see mature and performing groups. We want to get a broad sample. And also, focus groups. This is where you can talk to colleagues and talk to us about some challenges you're facing. Network might support you. And so on our next slide, we'll look at more tangible next steps. So again, you'll be having some emails. I know you get a lot of calls for surveys, but this is really important work that will help us kind of shape and meet those strategic goals of the Alliance and of the HFC network. So we invite you to participate in whatever capacity works for you. And finally, I did say, we want to hear from you today. So if we can launch our final poll of the day. And to go through it, it's simply asking what types of research would be most beneficial to you. We have some example and things we've heard from you already. Would it be evidence supporting best practices for designing and implementing coalition arrangements, data describing common themes, challenges, and concerns? Would it be case studies, much like what we've proposed here, policy analysis, studies examining various approaches? But I really encourage many of you to maybe click, as this is select all that apply, that other. If you have ideas, research questions, burning questions that are facing you right now, please throw those in the Q&A. We'd love to hear from you and begin to be in dialogue around this project. And with that, we do have some time left for some questions. So I'll invite those from you all. And thank you so much for your time. Oh, let's look at our results. Great. Best practices. Great, and we can go to our last slide where we do have our contact information. I know you know Minerva well, but please feel free to reach out at any time with questions or ideas for us as we go through this together. Thank you.
And just a reminder for folks, feel free to drop your questions for today's presenters into the chat or the Q&A. We have about 20 minutes left in the session, so we'd be happy to get to some of those. And Minerva, if you'd like to rejoin us, maybe you have a question for Amanda to get us started.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you, Amanda, for, working with us at the Alliance. And I'm just curious, like you've been designing this research study, have spoken to a few of our hunger-free community partners. In terms of what you're seeing, just observing, how well do you think in general the impact framework, which we recognize is very imperfect and not like we didn't create this with a lot of research. It kind of came out of my head, and I tested it with some of our partners and they said that sounds great, but just curious as to how well overall you think it lines up. And we really look forward to the updates to the impact framework. I think the first lesson I'm taking away is that this, of course, is not a straight line, right? Like that these are iterative processes, and groups may, sort of kind of hang out in one stage for a very long time. But I'd love to hear your overall impression.
Sure. So the first thing I'll say is I can't wait to speak to groups in the focus groups and hear from folks in the survey to get kind of that evidence. I need to really officially make that call. What I will say is this, just from the theoretical elements, from the case studies we've seen and from observing the network over time, I'll go back to what I said the first time we met, Minerva, maybe 2 years ago, that this is a brilliant framework, right? It maps really well against as a baseline and draws together many of the theoretical kind of puzzle pieces that we've been playing with around collaboration and specifically community-based collaboration. And I also think there are huge opportunities. And you said the first time we met, many groups might have elements of one level and another, right? Like there was all that this is messy. This is not a linear process. So I think it maps really well as a baseline, right? I think we have the opportunity to expand it and acknowledge some of the complexity that's really difficult to talk about. And how wonderful would it be for groups, right? Talking to funders, talking to community members, talking to potential partners, to have that kind of shared language and common understanding to navigate the challenges they might be facing. So I'm excited as a community practice to see how we might revise it together. But to answer your question, I think it's a fantastic starting place to work from. And I can't wait to talk to groups more about it.
Well, I don't see any questions yet. Unless folks are putting questions in the chat, then apologize. Please put them in the Q&A so we can make sure to answer them. But I did see some chat potentially about being part of the Hunger-Free Communities Network. So all of our Hunger-Free Communities Network partners are on our website. There's a map, and actually in our sponsor booth, there's a link to a document that has all of our partners listed there in case you're interested. And I'll be able to also kind of put that in the chat as well, the link to our partners. But we are looking always to expand just in terms of joining the Hunger-Free Communities Network. It is free to join. So the network itself, there's no cost. We really want to create this community of practice to help you all. And so our goal is to help be a support, a resource, to you all, not to extract resources from your organization. So there are no fees to being part of the network. The groups we are looking to partner with are groups that are working in a multi-sector way or want to work in a multi-sector way in their communities to address hunger, sort of at the broad community level, right? So if that sounds like that's your organization or your coalition, or that's something you're aspiring to, join us in the Hunger-Free Communities Network, because that is where we can help give you examples of similar groups in other states or different organizing models that we've seen, or connecting with some people who may be looking to do similar work in your community. Most of our national partners at the Alliance have local affiliates. So in that sense, I think that the network is very rich. But would love to answer any questions that folks have.
You two are getting lots of love in the chat, but I don't see any participant questions. So,
well,
Minerva, I think you can go into your closing announcements if you'd like, and if folks have questions, I'll bring those to your attention.
Yeah, and we won't leave right away. So if you have a question and you don't get a chance to ask it right now, we'll be on for a few minutes. But first of all, thank you all. Really appreciate your interest in the work we're doing at the Alliance to End Hunger and the Hunger Free Communities Network. We appreciate that you're working so hard in your communities to really create hunger-free communities around the country. So we appreciate you. And so next up, we're going to move into our last block of workshops for the day, which we're really thrilled about, to bring you 3 more exciting workshops. One is a case for giving SNAP a raise, leveraging legislation to support local change. The second one is strategies to take care of yourself, mental health in community engagement work. And we'll have ASL captions and audio translation into Spanish as well. Español es disponible. And then the final session is text ordering and text delivery, how technology can decrease barriers to emergency food. And those sessions are starting at 3:45. So if we don't have any questions for this session, we can let folks go. Well, I do
Looks like
see
we have a
one
question in the Q&A from Tamara.
It looks like you can't find the list of members. So if you go to, on our website, there's a Hunger Free Communities, under our programs, you'll see Hunger Free Communities. And on that page, there is a map. And under the map, there's like a resource you can pull down. But I'll put that URL in the chat to make it a little easier for folks. And I'll go ahead and stop my share.
And it looks like Amira went ahead and shared that link earlier in the chat. So if you scroll up, there is a link to that. Thank you so much, Amira.
Thank you so much. Yes, and feel free to reach out to me individually. You can find me in the People tab to let me know that you're interested in getting more information or joining the network. And if you're not on our regular mailing list and would like to be part of the research Amanda's talking about, please let us know either by direct message to one of us in the People tab or in the chat as well. And that way we can follow up with you for the research. Wonderful. Amanda, any final words?
I'll just say it's a privilege to work with the network. I always get excited by all the great things that such a good day. So I hope everyone's enjoying the summit as much as I am. And thank you so much for the privilege of speaking with you all today.
Thank you, everyone. We'll hang out for a minute, but feel free to leave the session and choose your selection for your next set of workshops, join the lobby chat, or check out one of our sponsor booths. So please enjoy the rest of the conference, and we'll see you back on the main stage later on at 4:30.